Okay, I think we're going to get started. We want to welcome you. Thank you for joining us today for the third in our discussions and the second kind of collective discussion in the series. We are just excited. I'm always excited to be with you all around these topics and Justin and Leah and other folks. And we want to acknowledge that we're on Pima and Peepaw ancestral land here at Arizona State. I also want to acknowledge that the recent killing of Devontae Wright and just acknowledge that we really are grateful for you joining us, especially given all that's going on in the world right now. I'm going to turn it over to my wonderful colleague, Justin Hosby, who will sort of give further acknowledgement, and we'll get started. Again, thank you so much for being here with us.
Yes, thank you, JT. I just wanted to first, as you did as well, I'm in Atlanta, Georgia, so I would like to also recognize this is ancestral land of the Muskogee Creek people that I'm on right now. And just thinking about us and our objective here. This discussion series builds on an ongoing collaboration between myself and Dr. JT Roan to think about Black ecologies and Black geographies, while also building community with artists and organizers with the aim of imagining horizons beyond extraction and disposability. This work draws on histories of Black resistance that analyze racism and ecocide as twin forces, with the hopes of interrupting current regimes of degradation and death, and to chart alternative horizons for ourselves and for our communities. JT and myself have a piece forthcoming in Southern Cultures on these matters in the fall of 2021. And it has been an honor for myself just to kind of think and work and write alongside JT and help him with this discussion series. It's been a real honor. In this work, JT and myself and the whole project, we're intellectually indebted to so many thinkers in Black geographies and Black environmental thought, some of whom are actually on the program over the course of the few weeks that we have here. However, there's so many people, we don't want to leave anybody out, so we don't want to have a path of citations, but we are indebted to so many important Black scholars and thinkers. Thank you. We are also heavily indebted to two of JT's mentors from undergrad, Dr. Claudrina Harold and Dr. Wendy Marshall. They continue to provide models about how to think, how to act, and how to create in the service of Black possibility, Black liberation, Black art, and Black futures. For this particular program, we would like to thank foremost our co-conspirators in putting this program together: Emerald Rutledge, PhD candidate in English literature at the University of Wisconsin-Madison; Leah Kaplan, PhD student in philosophy at Emory University; and Alexis Young, an undergraduate 4+1 journalism major here at Arizona State University. Without their contributions to bring together the themes and to compose this program, it would not have been possible. We are also grateful to our sponsors: Arizona State University's Institute for Humanities Research, the ASU School for Social Transformation, Deans Madavi and Cohen in the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences, Dean Boone in the College of Global Futures, the School of Historical, Philosophical, and Religious Studies, the Digital Humanities Initiative, and the Environmental Humanities Initiative. In particular, we want to thank Jeannie Colquette, Kike Palacios in SST, Selena Osuna, Lauren Whitby, and the tireless Liz Grumbach at IHR. Jeannie, thank you very much, and you know why. We would also like to shout out and especially thank People Strike, which emerged last May in a call with the leaders from Cooperation Jackson, calling for mass action against the conditions of disposability that COVID, essential workers, and police murders brought directly to the forefront of many people's collective consciousness. In many ways, our efforts to bring together these materials are in dialogue with People Strike's demands to decarbonize the economy, end fossil fuel and extractive industries, institute a program based on reparations, repairing damages to frontline and defense line communities, the restoration of indigenous sovereignty, land back, and the transitioning of workers in petrochemical, nuclear, and extractive industries into ecologically sustainable work, as well as institute food sovereignty policies in industrial food and animal warehousing conditions, and also that contaminate our water and deplete our soils. We also hope to help institute local food growing based on agroecology and permaculture that preserve and expand biodiversity and soil preservation. I would like to also, last but not least, thank the wonderful contributors to these discussions. As you will see today and throughout this, for those of you who join the rest of our programs, we have a few more sessions left, and we have a final keynote with Dr. Ashante Reese from the University of Texas, Austin. I want to paste a link now to, you can register for our next talk, our next discussion series, and pasting that link right now. Okay. Please feel free to use the chat during the discussion. Also, please type your comments and questions when we get towards the end using the chat function. Get comfortable. As JT said, take care of yourself, because of course that brings us a long way towards practicing the collectivity that we need to survive our current environmental situation. Please note that this discussion is polyphonic. No one's coming from the same experiences, understandings, interpretations, methods, means, or modes of creation. So please respect everyone here. Automatic closed captioning has been implemented if you would like to activate it as well. And thank you again for coming.
Again, thanks everyone. I want to introduce, it's my great pleasure to introduce Leah Kaplan, who I have had the pleasure of working with during my time at Black Perspectives. Leah Kaplan is a graduate student in philosophy at Emory University. Her research interests are broadly categorized under Caribbean philosophy, Black critical theory, and political economy. Within these discourses, she's particularly interested in answering questions around Black time. She's currently an assistant editor, again, at Black Perspectives, and her recent work has appeared in Proctor Notes. And I just want to say that Leah is absolutely brilliant. So I am excited to go on this journey with you as our lead through it, Leah. Turning it over to you.
Oh, thank you, JT and Justin. Welcome, everyone. I'm Leah, as JT said. I'll be your host for this evening. Thank you for joining us for this week of the Black Ecologies series. I also just want to echo what Justin and JT already acknowledged, which was all the labor that goes into this organizing. So I certainly want to thank JT and Justin, Emerald, Alexis, Jeannie, Lauren, Liz, Selena, and all of our presenters for contributing to this series. I look forward to some of the discussion we're going to have today and over the next few weeks. So our first presentation will be an interview with Eva Dickerson and Emerald Rutledge. We've already introduced Emerald, but Eva dreams of a freer, greener future for herself and the communities she loves, and sees her work connecting culturally relevant food justice strategies to global climate solutions as an integral part of getting here. There. Studying under Black Earth stewards, farmers, agrarians, and climate activists of the South, she was initiated in the Black radical tradition of building self-determined communities through cooperative agricultural practices. And co-conspirator Emerald Rutledge, pronoun she, her, hers, is a PhD student in the English department at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, where she also received her MA in Afro-American Studies as an Advanced Opportunity Fellow. She is broadly interested in queer theory and 20th century African-American and Black queer literatures. Please join me in welcoming Eva and Emerald.
Hi, everyone. My name is Emerald Rutledge. I am a PhD student at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and I am also a co-convener of the Black Ecologies series. I'm so excited to be here at home in Atlanta to have a conversation with Farmer Eva about Black farming as world building. So Eva, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, friend.
Hey.
My name is Eva. I live here in Atlanta. I've built community in Atlanta. I hold a lot of different intricate, fun identities, but in this space, the ones that are coming to me the most are farmer, teacher, community builder, constellation architect. And I came to really claim these and sit in these really through my matriculation, initiation, and study of Black foodways and Black food growth in the Deep South from some amazing Southern women.
Talk to me a little bit more about the Black folks who sort of brought you into the farming practice that you have now, and who've helped define what being a Black farmer, especially in the South, means to you today.
Yeah. I really understand my role as a community farmer as being a part of a lineage, which as a Black person, as a Black woman, you understand the importance of lineage in African descendant communities. my love of food really comes from my mother, which is something I want to be more intentional about uplifting. She taught us how to build community through watching her build community through feeding people. She was in the choir, and growing up, she always signed up to be the person who made sure the choir got fed. So in between being on stage, she was running back to the church kitchen and getting the food together. And everyone's like, Sister Paula, you cooking again this Sunday? And as a small Black child, especially as a Black girl child, I just saw my mom serving more and more. But now as an adult, as someone who's learned about, extraction and replenishment and community and love and food is love, I really have to give honor and gratitude to my mom for instilling that in us. As someone who has intentionally entered agriculture politically as an adult, though, there are so many Black women that I have to credit and uplift for not only teaching me the technicalities and mechanics of how to grow something, but the technicalities and mechanics of how to bring something to life, which is what Black women have been doing for millennia, what Black queer people have been doing for millennia. They have been bringing miniature worlds to life and large-scale worlds to life at the snap of their finger. And it is through my kinship and love of these Black women that I've been able to witness and be trained in the process of world building. And for me, it's through farming. But I think for a lot of Black people, world building is something that our people teach us. I am close to me personally. I'm really thinking of like Elsie Parks, who is just like everything, literally a supernova, like a teacher, a mentor, a sister, a mother, an auntie, definitely from the South, of the South, and sees that this land work is critical to our future and our freedom. Zara Alabanza, Whitney Stevens, Andrea Blanton, Anna Marie Shreves, who is the person who as an adult taught me about loving as a verb. I really hope it's Alexis Pauline Gumbs, who is like sistering is a verb. Anna Marie is the one who's just like, sistering is a verb and I'm gonna be your sister, but loving the earth also needs to be an action and I'm gonna teach you how to do that as well. I'm also thinking of Maveen Besh, the beach lady, Janetta Besh-Cole's sister, the beach lady who was really just like one of the first Black women environmental activists that I'd ever heard of. And we know what the larger environmental movement looks like. Ashante Reese, who was the first person I studied food justice or food sovereignty under. Denise Blake, someone I studied under. And I would be remiss if I did not name, of course, Fannie Lou Hamer, who like is the politic. It's all right there. It's sitting right there. If you need to study anything, just study Fannie. Like, we out here reading all these. No, we got a public intellectual right here who did it and said it right here. I could go on. Monica White, like so many Black women, Dara Cooper, who have given their life to this work and given their life to replicating themselves in the next generation, in the next person, in the next sister. But yeah, yes.
Cool, thank you. I think something that's really stuck out to me as you were naming these women who've been so impactful and influential in how you've come to understand food justice and farming is farming and love coming together, right? And I think that that's something that's so beautiful, is to think of that as a way that you can sort of enact your own love politic, right? Through feeding people, through food justice, through food sovereignty, through Black farming, right? And I think that that's really beautiful to explicitly lay out that connection for you. It's not something that's like distant from your person, but something that is very intimate and also very collective, right? And also affectionate, very feelings, right? And I think that that's really beautiful. So tell me a little bit more about how you came to do this work on this farm that we're on right now, and sort of your work with the school and things.
Yeah, that story is much less deep, pretty funny. I went to undergrad at Spelman, and I was good at undergrad. I was having a lot of fun, and I was having so much fun that I did not plan for what was after Spelman. And I got wrapped up in one of these like predatory college bridge programs for young adults. Mine was teaching based. But yeah, while I was there, you know, dealing with the politics of being in that space, I realized that I do love teaching. It's something that's intrinsic to me, and I do want to do it, just not through them. So I quit that program. But before I quit, I had put tons of applications across Atlanta looking for a very inexperienced first-year teacher. And my application also includes my agriculture application. And this school had just started a urban agriculture program, and they were looking for someone who was both experienced in working with children and had some agricultural knowledge. And I just happened to be that. I really actually think the reason I got this job was through community, because an old mentor of mine, my friend Jimmy, helped run the bicycle program and heard that I was applying, and he wrote me a letter of recommendation. And so the experience I'd gotten through undergrad with farming, and like just the experience of being an auntie, an older sister, someone in community, brought me to Thomasville Heights Elementary School, where, you know, I get to work with little seeds, you know, little babies who are going to plant themselves somewhere and grow new worlds for themselves, which is really cool. And for me, teaching and farming comes together, especially teaching young people and farming comes together under this idea of like abolition being a politic of growth. Like, what will we grow from the ashes of the new world? So I am literally planting seeds into the soil and being one of many people to cultivate these children who are seeds for the future that we are trying to build. And getting to see the parallels between watching the food grow and watching them grow, which is, I've only been here for 2 years, but it's monumental to me. And has really concretized this understanding that abolition is so much more than what we can destroy. It's how much we can imagine and build. And so I think a lot of my work here with them, you know, outside of teaching them to farm, outside of teaching them about food sovereignty, is just being someone to open imaginative pathways. I think I'm visibly queer. You know, somebody might say different. I think I'm one of the most visibly queer people in the building, at least. And so, like, you know, that's what, like, you could grow up and you might look like Farmer Eva with no hair and strange piercings and tattoos, or, you know, like, you know, I want them to want to be farmers, but there's also that element of like, will you be an artist when you grow up? You know, will you be a content creator when you grow up? Just offering avenues that I see reflected in me around with my friends. You know, like, will you be a caretaker when you grow up? But I'm sure other adults are doing that for them, but to just be one more adult in their life that's doing that for them. And yeah, I think a lot of my work with them, just like a lot of the work that's rooted in farming, is this faith in your imagination. Like, someone had to imagine that this farm could look like this. Multiple people had to imagine and then believe and invest that this farm could look like this. As caretakers and cultivators of young people, we have to have like expansive imaginations that one day they will be things that we can't even describe right now, and keep pushing into it and believing it. So yeah.
Talk to me a little bit more about the West End Farmers Market that you started during your time at Spelman.
Yeah. Okay, so I was going to my local NPU meetings, and I guess this had to be late 2017. And some of my OGs, Jeolu and Harriet, came to the neighborhood meeting, and they were passing around a survey about a farmer's market. And I think 2017, I had just hit in a stride with like, I think I want to be a farmer. I really love this earthwork. I feel good every time I go to a garden. And I think I just finished working at my first farm, this white man. But they were passing around the survey at this neighborhood meeting. I didn't even fill it out. I wrote "hire me" on the survey, and I passed it back. And then a few months later, JO reached out to me, and they said they were looking for an assistant market manager to help build up the market alongside them. I had no experience at farmers market. I did have a limited experience like working in gardens and things like that, but I had a lot of experience event planning, community building, like strategizing and things like that. And for me, the farmers market was an opportunity to practice the politic I'd been developing on campus in Spelman amongst community collaboratively. One of the things myself, Jayolu, and Andrea would always say was like, we're not bringing people together to exchange food items, which is what was happening. We're really bringing our community together to exchange ideas. Our goal for the farmers market was to be a space of deep community collaboration, sometimes political education, just the things. We love community, okay? Yeah, I think we all of us were AUC grads. Jayolu and Andrea had years of experience on me of what it meant to use food as a way to fuel and heal and collect community. And so I think we all came to it with this understanding that we were here as potential healers. And we were coming with our skills, Andrea with her skills with healing and having been an expert market manager, Jayolu with his skills with having been a farmer in the past and doing food systems work, and myself, just growing, really believing that if we could bring enough Black people in our neighborhood together and make it a space that they wanted to be in, a space that they felt good, a space that felt curated to their needs, we could start meeting some of the needs of our community on our own. And in some ways that happened, in some ways that didn't, like everything, it was another experiment. I think we did succeed in curating a space that people felt was intentional and curated for them. I think we did succeed in demonstrating the ways that farmers market can, not even just demonstrating, but continuing the legacy of the ways that farmers markets can be tools for good and social justice. I think our politic could be sharpened around what it means to use one local farmers market to come up against the whole food movement. I think if we had a few more years, we would have gotten there. But that was really special for me. And so working on the farmers market in the West End helped me recognize even further the barrier between Spelman and the West End and Vine City. And it was something I'd already recognized because I was just obsessed with Atlanta and I hadn't been spending most of my time on campus if I couldn't. But being among community in the West End Farmers Market that way really made me realize how isolated Spelman was from the community and how institutionalized that isolation was. Like an anecdote I used to always tell when I was like working really hard at school was that the first years learn about the West End is that when you go out, you need to travel in groups of 2s or 3s or else you'll get sexually assaulted. Yeah, during orientation, they used to have Chief Bowser give this talk, and that would be the highlight of the talk. All this like fear mongering about our community, right? And like this is the largest consortium of Black institutions in the world, and the students don't even spend their dollars in the West End, much less build community with the West End or Vine City. And because I'd come up under Dr. Reese, because I'd come up under Zara and Elsie and Abiadoun, I understood that food could be a solution to so many things outside of just, like hunger and diet-based illness. And I really, really wanted Spelman to have a farmer's market. And most people know that as my, I don't know, what's the word? MO as Miss Spelman. But that work actually started long before I became Miss Spelman. The research for it, the collaboration for it, the crying over it, a lot of that started like a year and a half before I became Miss Spelman. But as Miss Spelman, I had enough institutional clout, very little still, but just enough to make that programmatic and something I wanted to see. And for the time that it ran, because it got off the ground right before COVID, I think it was starting to accomplish some of the goals I wanted for it. Once again, I think that politic of like what a farmer's market means in terms of building power could have been sharpened. But then again, my politic was still being sharpened, and I still have a lot more to read and to do and to study. But yeah, for me, farmers markets are really just a chance to practice what it could mean to use the ways that we organize ourselves around distributing food and eating food to solve other problems.
Well, thank you so much for talking to me today, friend. It's been wonderful. I hope that you all have enjoyed our conversation. Feel free to keep up with Eva on social media. Thank you again for joining us.
That was so wonderful to see that conversation. And it just brought to mind like a lot of the things that are happening here in Chicago around guerrilla gardening, and how the city just refuses to allow people to establish community gardens without having sort of property rights, et cetera. So I really would like to talk more about guerrilla gardening and food sovereignty. But as we move on to our next presenter, Dr. Hilda Lloréns is a cultural anthropologist and decolonial scholar, and associate professor of anthropology at the University of Rhode Island. The thread that binds Dr. Lloréns' scholarship is understanding how racial and gender inequality manifest in cultural production, nation building, access to environmental resources, and exposure to environmental degradation. Dr. Lloréns' research has been centrally concerned with critiquing structural inequalities and dismantling taken for granted notions of power. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Hilda Lloréns.
Hello, everyone. I am Dr. Hilda Lloréns, and I am an associate professor of anthropology and marine affairs at the University of Rhode Island. Before I begin my presentation, I'd like to thank JT Ron and Justin Husby and everybody else who worked on putting together this Black Ecologies series. I'm really grateful and delighted to be able to share my work here today alongside so many wonderful panelists. And thank you so much for the space and the opportunity. My presentation is titled Extraction and Ecological Resistance in a Black Puerto Rican Cultural Zone. I do my ethnographic work in Puerto Rico's southeast, which is a region that faces the Caribbean Sea. I've been doing work there since 1998. I've been doing ethnographic work, right? First as a master's student, and then as a PhD student, and then as a faculty member for over 2 decades. This is also the region where my family is from, and this is my maternal family, and my mom, my aunt, and my uncle. And in my work, I do a lot of auto-theory and life thinking to think about, right, my ancestral, the life of my ancestors and my ancestral heritage that in the Americas begins in this region. And of course, my family, my ancestors were brought against their will to this region to toil in the sugarcane plantations here. I speak about this and about the environmental justice work I've been doing in that region in a forthcoming book titled Making Livable Worlds, Afro-Puerto Rican Women Building Environmental Justice, and that book is forthcoming in November of 2021. And some of what I'm sharing here today is actually some of what I detail of course, detail with a lot more time in that text. So briefly, I just want to give you a sense of the timeline that I've been thinking about, right, in this work. And so I think about the sugar plantations that emerged there beginning in the 17th century, and which essentially shuttered, the last plantation shuttered in 1990. So the sugar plantation economy and life that marks this region, right, is just ended a few decades ago, if it has ended. I'm not sure that it has. In the mid-20th century, what happens is that Puerto Rico's industrialization is powered from the southeast. So this region is marked as a region, right, that will hold all of the toxic contaminating industries that will power the rest of Puerto Rico's industrialization. So what happens is the sugar plantations, where there used to be sugar plantations, now now contains, right, power plants, factories, oil refineries, pharmaceuticals, military bases, right? So this region becomes marked as the region that will power the rest of the island's industrialization. And what happens is, of course, that the people in this region will pay for that with their health. In the 21st century, I'm asking what kind of coastal futures will produce good lives and higher well-being for the people in this region, okay? And I'm gonna talk about both the kind of environmental injustice piece and the kinds of ways in which people deal with that, and then a bit about ecological resistance at the end of this presentation. The Hobos Bay, as I said, is an environmental injustice hotspot. It is a sacrifice zone. This is an area that, as I said before, contains many people who are descendants of Black and Afro laborers who came to toil on the sugar plantations, including my family. It has a high poverty index because when the sugar plantations ceased to exist, right, thousands of people were left without jobs. It is a place in which people, including my family, experience a great deal of dispossession, and which led to outmigration, particularly to New York and the New England area of the United States at that time. Of course, those migrations have now shifted into other regions of the US, such as the Midwest and the South, Atlanta, places like Georgia, Atlanta, and of course, Florida. So here, I just wanted to show you, right, the industries that are located there today. I focus my work on two particular entities, one, the Aguirre Power Complex, and the other, the AES coal power plant. So I'm focusing and have focused my work on the energy producing entities located in this region. This is the view of the sugar mill, the Aguirre sugar mill. This was the last sugar mill to shutter in 1990, leaving thousands of workers without jobs. This is located on the Hobos Bay, and where the Aguirre power plant is also located. The Aguirre power plant produces about 40% of Puerto Rico's electricity. It is located in the Aguirre neighborhood. The Aguirre neighborhood, as I said before, also contains the ruins of the Aguirre sugar mill. The Aguirre neighborhood has the distinction of having been a segregated company town in Puerto Rico. And one of the analogies I like to make here is that the Southeast, Puerto Rico Southeast, is Puerto Rico South, not only in terms of its location, because it is located in Puerto Rico South, but it's also akin to the kinds of plantation lives, right? The kind of plantation realities of the US South, right? And here, this town was a segregated company town owned by Americans, actually, first by Spanish and later by Americans who imposed a segregated structure in Puerto Rico, which one of the things to know about Puerto Rico is that Puerto Rico never had de facto or Jim Crow laws, such as the United States, but it did in this particular town. This particular town was actually segregated in the ways in which the US South plantation towns were segregated. So that's a particular experience that people in this region also experience that is different from other parts of Puerto Rico and other kinds of experiences. Today, this power plant complex, as I said, produces 40% of Puerto Rico's energy. This runs on diesel and bunker C oil. It is highly contaminating. This neighborhood has one of the highest air contamination rates in all of Puerto Rico, and the people who live here are, of course, descendants of sugar mill workers and plantation workers. So they are in their majority Black and Afro Puerto Ricans. This is a fishing village. It's also contaminated the bay. So in order to fish, the people, the fishers in this village have to go further out to sea than they had been going out before this plant was placed here in the 1970s. There's a great deal of asthma in this community, a great deal of noise pollution, which has led to hearing loss among the population here. This is what it looks like, right? It is in the same neighborhood as the sugar mill. So it went from being a plantation, a sugarcane plantation neighborhood, to being, a place that produces the energy for Puerto Rico. And yet they don't get any of the jobs. Locals don't work in this power complex, but they pay, right? They pay with their lives, with their health, for powering Puerto Rico's industrialization and Puerto Rico's energy addiction. Um, this is the Bahia de Jobos, which is, I just wanted to give you an aerial view of this region. The Bahia de Jobos happens to be a federal research reserve, so it is a protected region. However, flanking the Jobos Bay is both the Aguirre Power Complex and the AES coal power plant. So on both sides of the bay, you have these two energy producing and highly contaminating industries. So the people in this region are highly affected by the contamination that these two factories, these two energy plants are producing for the rest of Puerto Rico, right? Because most of the energy produced here goes to power, actually, the San Juan region. So after the hurricane, right, when people were left without power for 11 months, some of these communities were the last to get power back, even though the tourist region in San Juan had began receiving power essentially a month after the hurricane. They were left in the dark for a lot longer than that, even though these power companies are in fact in their communities, right? So I'm going to focus on the coal power plant. The coal power plant is the only coal power plant operating in Puerto Rico. It opened in 2002. It produces this waste that you're seeing here. This is a mountain of coal ash waste. It is toxic. It causes cancer. This particular mountain of coal waste is produced right after the coal is burned to produce energy. This waste is shipped out to different parts of the world that receive toxic coal ash. So for some time, this coal ash was shipped to the Dominican Republic. It made people very sick there. So those shipments were stopped because the Dominican Republic sued this company, and they actually won the lawsuit. And so they ship it to the US South, actually. So one thing to think about is, where is this going? What communities in the US South are now being affected by this environmental injustice, right? Where is this toxic coal ash ending up in the US South, right? So, however, when the company produces so much coal ash that it cannot ship it out fast enough. So they have this huge mountain left out open to the elements. And so in the meantime, right, while this is waiting to be shipped to some landfill in some community around the world, but mostly, right, at this point, it's being shipped actually to Jacksonville, Florida. By the way, this is where we know that this waste is going at this very moment. But in the meantime, the waste sits out in the elements. So this waste has been here polluting, right, the air, contaminating the aquifer. So this is the aquifer that feeds potable water for 100,000 people in this region. The aquifer is now contaminated. It has all the toxins here have leached into the soil, which have leached into the water. And we know that the aquifer is contaminated. This is flying everywhere. People are breathing this in. Animals are breathing this in. The plants are covered in this toxic coal ash. This waste is going into the bay. And people are, of course, dying, right? The rates of cancer have skyrocketed in this region since 2002. Miscarriages have skyrocketed, right? Birth defects have skyrocketed. So people are really paying with their health for these contaminating entities that, of course, power Puerto Rico's energy grid. This particular plant, most of this energy goes to the tourist section of Puerto Rico. When power plants were closing in the global north, the coal industry began to push power plants in the global south. And this is how Puerto Rico ended up with this coal plant. And actually one of the ways in which they framed this power plant being a good thing for Puerto Rico was that this power plant would just give all its energy to the tourist sector, right? So they said, well, the tourist sector is growing. This is in the early 2000s. So now you need a really reliable power source to power, right, the hungry, the energy hungry tourists and tourist industry. So here, when we go to San Juan, when we go to San Juan's tourism district, maybe you can remember that people in the South, that Black and Afro-descendant people in Puerto Rico's South are paying with their health to give tourists this energy, okay? Now, people live here, people play here, right? People worship here, people leisure here. And this is a Caribbean Sea bay, which families use to fish, to bathe, to enjoy themselves, to have barbecues. And they are here, right, enjoying themselves. This was actually on the 4th of July of 2018 that I took this photo with this toxic coal ash open to the elements in the background, right? And so, of course, there is skyrocketing of cancers, of asthma, of birth defects, of renal dysfunction, because this ash is essentially everywhere. It's affecting everyone, including, of course, non-human animals. Right? So the impacts of this environmental injustice are quite great in this region. One of the things I want to talk about briefly is that this region has an incredible wealth of Black ecological knowledge and Black ecological traditions. And one of these traditions is land crabbing, and people eat land crabs. It's a emblematic, actually, Black Caribbean food. And so one of the things that the company, the coal plant, has done is to, say, this is private property. You cannot put land crabs. You cannot put traps here. You cannot come foraging for crabs here. So one of the things the company has taken away is also people's rights to their cultural traditions, to access to the land on which they are on which they forage for food. Of course, there's a lot more land. This isn't the only land available for this, but this was foraging land that people depended on for food. So I want to turn now to talk just briefly about ecological resistance. In this Black cultural zone, residents practice Black ecological traditions. And I'm just going to focus on 3: land crabbing, mangrove oysters, and coconuts. And the ethnographic work that I've been doing is focusing on fishing, foraging, gardening, and on foodways. But as a Black cultural region, there's a great deal of cultural traditions that sustain Black life here, such as festivals, carnivals, commemorations, spiritual ecological practices. These are all sustainable and life-affirming practices that the Afro-descendant people in this region, engage in and have engaged historically.
Wow, that was really resonant with some of the work I do around the Bahamas. There is a lot of exporting of crisis into the Caribbean. And so that is one way in which that happens. And sort of, I would like, if Dr. Lloréns is here, to talk about austerity and debt that is afflicting Puerto Rico and how that impacts sort of transnational corporations being able to exploit islands like that. But we're gonna move on to our next presenter. So our next presenter is Johnnie Mercer. Johnnie Mercer is a graduate of Virginia Commonwealth University with a BFA in dance and choreography. Johnnie is a maker, a producer, educator, and artist, artistic entrepreneur based in New York City. Mercer is currently the 2019-2021 Artist in Residence at Brooklyn Arts Exchange, 2020 and 2021 Black Artist Space to Create Air through the New Dance Alliance, and a 2020-2021 Ping Chong and Company Creative Fellow. Please join me in welcoming Johnnie Mercer. Well done. I see that Johnnie Mercer is here, so I hope that we can have some discussion around that piece. I am curious, just for my own interest, why Harlem, not Brooklyn, in terms of landscape? We know that Brooklyn has far more trees, far more and less concrete than Harlem. And I used to live in Harlem, so I'm really curious about that. So thank you for that. So our next presenter is Ebony Noel Golden, who is an unflinchingly pursues justice as an artist, scholar, and cultural strategist, hailing from Houston, Texas, and currently living and working in Harlem. She is the founder and CEO at Betty's Daughter Arts Collaborative LLC. Since 2009, her collaborative has successfully supported organizational transformation, culture power, and movement building for education, social impact, wellness, with some of the most forward-leaning organizations nationally. Her creative coaching and consulting work heavily rely on transparent and equitable partnerships with community members, institutions, and artists actively working for justice and freedom today. Please join me in welcoming Ebony Noel Golden.
50 years ago, Dr. Barbara Ann Tier changed the language around the people who are performing as a part of this family. Actors, no. Liberators, yes. Hello, my name is Ebony Noel Golden, and I'm the creator of 125th and Freedom, and also the inaugural Directing Fellow at the National Black Theater. This 50th season for NBT is an accumulation and a manifestation of the work that's been done for the last 50 years. This moment couldn't be possible without every year being a year about liberation. And for 125th and Freedom to be a part of this, it's beyond my wildest dreams. I'm learning about my capacity to stretch beyond what I think I know. I am here to use every creative capacity for my people, for our people, for all of the communities that I want this to resonate in. You don't have to be a poet. You don't have to be a dancer. You can be a bus driver. It is all of us on this planet together, in this universe together.
But in terms of recognizing that what is happening in these places in terms of poverty is a responsibility that has to be dealt with by those who are not impoverished.
Wonderful, wonderful. Yeah, it got me thinking a lot about memory and time, that double exposure, triple exposure, those multiple exposures. So thank you, Ebony. So our last presenter is going to be Teona Williams. Teona Williams is a doctoral candidate in history and African American studies at Yale University. Her work revolves around US environmental history, political ecology, race and ethnic studies, environmental justice, digital humanities, and African American history. Her current work explores Black women agrarianism and the struggle for land reparations from the New Deal era to the Black Power movement. Please join me in welcoming Teona Williams.
Hello, everyone. My name is Teona Williams, and I am a PhD candidate in African American Studies and History at Yale University. I have long brown passion twists in my hair. I'm wearing brown glasses and dark brown lipstick. My sweater is black and white, and my background is sort of blurred, but you can make out an emerald color in the background. And today I'll be expanding on the histories of Black women, disposability, and disaster as it relates to Black ecologies. What follows are the lessons of survival that come from Black communities, lessons and reflections on how to live on in a world that feasts on Black disposability. First, I want to situate Black ecologies and histories of disasters in the recent informative literature by Gillian McCommons, J.T. Rohn, and Justin Hosby. They theorized Blackness's endless proximity to disaster by marking the disproportionate impact of climate change and superstorms on Black diasporic communities. They reflect how Black ecologies denote, and I quote, sites of ongoing injury, gratuitous harm, and premature death, end quote. In channeling McCommons, Rohn, and Hosby, I want to turn to Black feminist writer and disaster theorist Audre Lorde. On December 1989, she wrote a short letter on the aftermath of Hurricane Hugo, a storm that ripped through the island of St. Croix in 1989. This letter would become a part of a series of letters that archived her experiences surviving and living with a hurricane. She writes, "Dear friend, it is necessary to remember the nightmare experience and extraordinary heroisms of the hurricane. But it is also important that we remember those lessons, both immediate and long term, learned in the bleak days afterward. No one who experienced it will ever forget that night when the hurricane winds rode us down to a stand and the trees gave up their leaves and the land almost gave up her name," end quote. While these last few lines are a testament to the mark of disaster, a testament to living in the aftermath of a superstorm, and a testament to the litany of survival, what drew me most to Lorde's reflections was her call to uplift the history of Hurricane Hugo. It was the urgency that the past brings to bear on marking, tracing, and historicizing Black ecologies. And what follows is an exploration of the capacious framework of disaster that binds together many places and many temporalities. I think about the continuity of Lorde's words, the lessons that Black people learn about disaster, and the urgency to never forget. In fact, Elizabeth Pitts of Leflore County, Mississippi, speaks of the urgency of remembering too. A former sharecropper, she recalls one of her first experiences with superstorms. Recalling the year 1924, she lyrically describes leaving school early due to the darkened sky. Once back on the plantation where her family worked as sharecroppers, she remembered that her grandfather struck an axe into the ground. He then adeptly looked at the sky to see if the clouds split the axe, a skill that Pitt admits she never did learn, but attests to its efficacy. The Bible could do the trick, but with less accuracy. These were the lessons that were meant to be passed on, lessons that detail a history of survival and Black disposability. Once her grandfather saw the clouds split in acts, he called his family and told them to come into the garden. The garden plot, as J.T. Rohn notes in Plotting the Black Commons, is an insurgent space where lessons of Black resiliency and spatial imaginaries come alive. For in the family's plot, among their more than human kin, lay the answer to their survival. Her grandfather instructed his wife and grandchildren to grab onto a tree, for trees and not houses can bear the weight of the winds. Pitts grabbed a peach tree and remembered her grandfather covering her body, grabbing the same tree over her, using his body to shield her from the storm. She recalled that it was her first twister, but her grandfather had lived through many in his lifetime. While the idea of tree hugging in the middle of a twister may terrify us now, Pitts felt safest clinging to a tree. The wind whipped so fiercely that her body elevated off the ground. She saw her grandma's body elevate too, but not give in. Her parents, who chose to stay in the house, were thrown a half a mile on a mattress after the tin roof blew off. They at first did not believe that a tree provided more shelter than a house, but were proven wrong. After that, Pitts remembered that her mother learned quickly how to use an axe to read a storm. Her survival, her grandfather's survival, relied on trusting the trees, trusting the plot, trusting the past, and recalling the lessons. While there's a lot of history between 1924 and 1989, I bring these two archival memories together in conversation under the framework of Black ecologies. For it is Black ecologies that connect a hurricane in St. Croix to a tornado in the Mississippi Delta. It is Black ecologies that become a lesson in surviving the unsurvivable. Black ecologies hold radical possibilities of living on a planet damaged by settler colonialism, white supremacy, racial capitalism, and patriarchy. Indeed, the sharecropping system in which Pitts operated excised Black mobility and freedom by rendering a large population of African Americans to a life of starvation, poverty, and debt. It also trapped those people in disaster zones. Places never meant for permanent settlement. Places only settled because of white plantation fantasies and racial capitalism. Leflore County, like other counties of the Delta, sat as unceded territory of the Choctaw Nation. In fact, following colonial naming practices that attempted to erase indigenous genocide by naming spaces using indigenous languages, white settlers named Leflore County after the Choctaw leader who traded Delta soil for space in Oklahoma, a non-choice choice, as white settlers forcibly removed many, but never all, Choctaw from the region. The proximity to the Yazoo River made Leflore County a disaster zone, prone to the very twisters that made Pitts cling to peach trees. The Choctaw had very use of dominating nature for capital, and instead honored kinship relations, honored the flooding of the river, honored the passing of the storms by making certain areas and spaces sacred and for ceremony. I imagine that enslaved Africans who were forced into Leflore County to build up massive agricultural systems and cotton plantations also found it futile to build plantations in flood zones. And then, not even 100 years after the abolition of slavery, did their descendants find themselves confined, surveilled, and trapped in spaces meant to be sacred. After the storm hit LaFleur, Elizabeth Pitts and her family were beholden to the racist proclivities of the Red Cross, to the racist proclivities of white planters who decided when and how to rebuild tenants' homes. Disaster capitalism, while gaining traction in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina in 2005, may have been born in the Delta. When storms hit, white speculators moved in, buying up damaged land for cheap, making a profit out of Black suffering and disposability. A continuance of erasure, a marker of whiteness, first through settler colonialism and slavery, then through Black and Indigenous land dispossession, all with the same goal, to make land synonymous with whiteness and capital. And yet, as Lord reminds us in the opening of Generators and Survival, is that Black rural life lives on. The land renames itself, despite whiteness's addiction to destruction. I end this reflection on memory and survival by talking more explicitly about Black resilience and what it means to remember in preparation for disaster. I think about Jackson, Mississippi, and the ongoing water crisis. I think about what it took to survive and the speed at which communities adapted. I imagine all the ways that Black people have resisted disaster, ways that will never make it into the archive. Networks of care and acts of plotting against the state to keep the heat on, to access drinkable water, ways that the state made criminal. But I end, as I often end when talking about Black ecologies and all of its possibilities, through the lens of Fannie Lou Hamer, another daughter of the Delta, another theorist of disaster. She once famously said, "If the name of the game is survive, survive." And Blackness in ecological worlds do survive. In fact, I think of Black ecologies as the space where Black survival meets more than human survival. And that beat goes on. Thank you. So I wanted to end with some image descriptions. So as I was sort of talking, there was a slideshow running with 6 images in constant circulation, and I'm going to describe what each of those were. So the first image depicted a Black car entering a closed-off bridge covered in ice and snow. Ahead of it were 2 Black cars crossing the same bridge, with orange cones blocking parts of the bridge in the foreground. And also in the foreground, in the right-hand corner, there is a white sign with Black letters that say "Bridge Closed." The second image is a crowd of 13 Black people on St. Croix. They are standing in front of trees bent by the hurricane. 3 of the people in the forefront are holding a sign, with the left-hand corner being snapped up by the wind. The sign says, "Survived Hugo." The third image is a dark storm cloud hovering over a part of LaFleur County. In the background is a densely populated forest. The fourth image is an image of a water delivery drop-off in Jackson, Mississippi. There are 3 Black people working to unload the water for the distribution center. In the background, there is a tan brick building with 3 trees surrounding it. In the foreground is a trailer leaning slightly to the right, holding cases of bottled water. The 5th photo is an image of a small shanty house. In the background, there are several trees. The 6th and final picture is an image of 3 adults and 2 small children. In the background, there is a medium-sized farming truck surrounded by a sparse and slanted tree. In the back of the trailer, 3 people stand looking down at the street. In the forefront, a person with their back turned to the camera and in a white dress looks up at one of the children on the truck. On the side of the truck hangs a sign that in part reads, "Mighty, think positive." So again, thank you for your time. And I do look forward to the moments where these gatherings and ceremonies are held in person together in the best tradition of Black studies. In the interim, I hope that all of you who are watching are safe and warm and have everything that you need to survive. I especially want to thank the facilitators of this amazing series, JT Roan, Justin Hosby, Emerald Rutledge, Leah Kaplan, and Alexis Young. Thank you all for bringing together such an extraordinary cadre of activists and scholars who are dedicating to freeing the land, if I can loosely quote the Republic of New Africa. Thank you, and many blessings to you all.
Well done, Teona. That choice that isn't a choice, what they call in psychoanalysis a veil, is really interesting and speak to the unsovereign nature of a lot of these choices. So now is our last presenter. I made a mistake before. So our next presenter is Dr. Randi Gill-Sadler. Dr. Gill-Sadler is an assistant professor of English at Lafayette College. Her research and teaching interests include Black women's literature, cultures of US empire, Black diaspora studies, and Black feminist theory and literary criticism. She is currently a Cheryl A. Wall postdoc fellow in the English department at Rutgers University, where she is working on a manuscript that rethinks the literary period known as the Black women's literary renaissance by attending to the centrality of islands, archipelagos, and US imperial exploits in Black women's writing. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Randi Gill-Sadler.
I enter this discussion of Black ecologies from the real and imagined islands and archipelagos and Black women's writing during the period known as the Black women's literary renaissance. Black women's robust production of literature and literary criticism during this period, to quote Spillers, radically revised the image of Black women writing in isolation across space and time, and the room of one's own exploded its four walls to embrace the classroom, the library, and the various mechanisms of institutional and media life, end quote. In my own work, I am interested in how Black women writers like Paula Marshall, June Jordan, Toni Cade Bambara, and Gloria Naylor exploded the boundaries of the continental United States in their fiction, poetry, and essays. And in so doing, I argue they embraced islands and archipelagos as sites from which to confront and reckon with hemispheric US imperialism in the 1970s and 80s, as well as the effects of Black Americans' growing inclusion and participation in US imperial exploits on diasporic relationality. I read Black women's literature for diasporic rebukes, rebuffs, silences, and antagonisms, with the belief that such scenes in Black women's writing resist US discourses of compulsory hemispheric solidarity under global capital and US empire. Moreover, they might offer some semblance of an answer to Audre Lorde's haunting question, what does it mean to be a citizen of a country on the wrong side of every liberation struggle on this earth? Prior to and after the publication of Gloria Naylor's third novel, Mama Day, which is the subject of my remarks today, Naylor's fiction would explore Black Americans' informal and formal participation in state counterinsurgency and surveillance. In her second novel, Linden Hills, for example, though white supremacists sold Linden Hills founder Luther Nadeed the land to develop what would later become the Black middle-class enclave because of its seemingly nil value, Luther Nadeed and each generation of his sons curates the residents of the neighborhood so as to, quote, not produce any mad men like Nat Turner and Marcus Garvey, end quote. In Naylor's final completed novel, the fictionalized memoir 1996, the DEA illegally surveils Naylor with the help of Montgomery Swiss, a Black Harvard graduate who eagerly allows the agents to set up surveillance in his family's spare room, exclaiming, quote, of course we'll help our government, end quote. Naylor explores how the pursuit of Black bourgeois status and neoliberal inclusion pathologizes Black radical thought and politics and requires one to enact various forms of violence against other Black people, respectively. In moving this tension to the fictional island of Willow Springs in her third novel, Naylor would expand the scale of this conflict to the diaspora and elaborate its ecological implications. Mama Day's primary plot chronicles the courtship, romance, and marriage of George Andrews and Coco Day, despite significant differences in their backgrounds, politics, and temperaments. The couple returns to Coco's home of Willow Spring in the summer of 1985, where supernatural events stretch their love to its limits. Naylor's fictional island is 49 miles wide, bow-shaped, and sits between Georgia and South Carolina, unclaimed by either and absent from any cartographic rendering of the United States in the novel. Located within the actual Sea Island archipelago, Willow Springs has its own unique emancipation history. There was no Great War or constitutional amendments that granted the enslaved Black people on the island freedom. Instead, there is the legend of Sapphira Wade, described as sullen, bilious in nature, a midwife and nurse, and suspected of delving in witchcraft on her bill of sale in 1819. Sapphira, via conjuring, convinces Bascom Wade, the island proprietor and speculated father of Sapphira's 7 sons, to deed all of the land to the enslaved Black people in 1823. Shortly thereafter, as one version of the legend goes, Sapphira puts a dagger, quote, through his kidney and escapes the hangman's noose, laughing in a burst of flames, end quote, before returning to Africa. Like the actual Sea Islands, however, Willow Springs is more vulnerable to ecological disasters, like the hurricane of 1920 and the hurricane that hits the island in the summer of 1985, as well as predatory mainland developers who want to build on the land to, quote, bring better jobs and community uplift to the island. The legend of Sapphira Wade's actions in 1823, however, enables a generational and communal practice of decolonial refusal to Willow Springs. Decolonial refusal unique to Willow Springs. No Willow Spring resident has ever sold their land to stateside developers, a practice enforced by Sapphira Wade's great-granddaughter and titular character, Mama Day. Naylor's attention to Black communities' particular vulnerability to natural disaster and their strategies of contesting exploitative and predatory effects of urban development in Mama Day echo some of the concerns and insights of work in Black ecologies. Here I am thinking of J.T. Roan's analysis of Black people's plotting against structures of ecological extraction and commodification in the lower Chesapeake Bay, as well as Chelsea Frazier's attention to the ways that, quote, Black women are not and have never been passive victims of environmental degradation, end quote, as evidenced by their photography and literature. Moreover, Naylor's work further reifies Sonia Parmentier's argument in Cultivation and Catastrophe, the Lyric Ecology of Modern Black Literature, that both spectacular environmental and slower social disasters shape Black culture and literature. In addition to echoing these concerns and insights, I would like to suggest that Mama Day also offers another issue that warrants attention in our Black Ecologies discussion. In keeping with Naylor's attention to Black people's informal and formal participation in state counterinsurgency and surveillance, Mama Day, I'm suggesting, explores Black people's neoliberal inclusion into the state via ecological propriety and highlights inclusion on such terms as an ecological threat and danger in and of itself to Black communities across the diaspora. By ecological propriety, I mean environmental postures of conservation, innovation, and restoration that posit that the state and state institutions, and by extension, empire, are the sole sources of legitimate and viable solutions for ecological crises. Inclusion into empire by way of ecological propriety requires one to seek out credentials via state environmental agencies and universities, which in effect deputize deputizes individuals with said credentials to police alternative eco-epistemological frameworks, particularly those of non-US based working class and poor Black people. It is a posture that obscures the structural relationship between environmental crises, anti-Blackness, and empire, or rather that anti-Blackness is the weather, to quote Sharp, by rewarding individuals who adhere to imperial approaches to ecological crises that call for an increase of state power, further entrenchment of capitalism, and the displacement of Black people across an array of landscapes. In Mama Day, George is the primary but not only figure of ecological propriety. A mechanical engineer with credentials from Columbia, George describes his job to Coco on their first date. Quote, "My job is to redesign the structures that take care of our basic needs, water supply, heating, air conditioning, and transportation," end quote. Yet George believes that it's the private sector that holds the solutions to the recession of the 1980s, not more government spending. Though George does identify as Republican, and that could provide an easy explanation for his stance, I'm careful not to attribute his ecological propriety to that exclusively, as Democrats have contributed equally to ecological crises. Instead, I want to highlight George's fantasy future for Willow Springs as the evidence of his ecological propriety. On a solo walk on the island shortly after his and Coco's arrival, George makes the following observation about Willow Springs, quote, "More than pure, it was primal. Some of these trees had to have been here for almost 200 years, and the salt water feeding into the marshes dated back to eternity. A lot of this land and open space could be put to good use. Nothing parasitic like resorts or vacation condominiums, but experimental stations for solar energy, marine conservation. I could even see small test sites for hydraulic power. It would bring much needed income to the island and new people," end quote. At once in awe of the island's ecological legacy, and yet seemingly unaware of how the Willow Springs residents' ways of living have contributed to and helped to maintain that legacy, George renders the island vacant and awaiting, quote, "good use." Good use here is environmental innovations and conservation, which George believes to be less parasitic than the tourist resorts and vacation condominiums. Ironically, however, he utilizes the same rhetoric of developers that the Willow Spring residents, having observed what happened to the actual sea islands like St. Helena and Dafuski, have learned to decode. To them, bringing much needed income and new people to the island was code for, quote, "Get them folks this land, build fences around it first thing, and then bring in all the builders and high paid managers from Mainside. Ain't nobody on them islands benefited," end quote. The quote unquote good use ecological innovations that George imagines, rooted in his ecological propriety, effectively erases Black people from the island landscape and derives their social practices as though they have no ecological impacts. Practices like the Candle Walk, which is celebrated instead of Christmas, where residents line the streets, sharing and exchanging goods, with the only requirement being that what you gave, quote, "came from the earth and the work of your own hands," end quote. Practices like the informal eco-pedagogy Mama Day received as a child walking through the woods of the forest with her father, John Paul. "Little mama, these woods have been here before you and me, so why should they get out your way? Learn to move around them." These practices no doubt contribute to the awe-inducing ecologies George witnesses, but his belief in the private sector, capitalism, and empire as the source of solutions for ecological crises renders the Willow Springs residents as replaceable and placeless in George's fantasy. Though George's fantasy stems from his ecological propriety, it is worth noting that the Willow Springs community's ecological practices come from Naylor's own rejection of intellectual propriety. Following directives from Black feminist writers and pedagogues like June Jordan and Toni K. Bambara to, quote, "use as instructors those grandmothers, those on the corner heads as teachers," end quote, Naylor returns to Robinsonville, Mississippi to interview her grandmother's best friend, Eva McKinney, about root work and conjuring in preparation for writing Mama Day. Growing up in Robinsonville, Mississippi, which Naylor describes as the Black Hamlet, Naylor's mother was not allowed to attend the public library, prompting her to make her husband promise they would never raise children there. But in Naylor's return to interview Eva McKinney, McKinney would speak to the informal education she received in conversation with and eavesdropping on older Black women, learning which herbs worked the body, which herbs reduce swelling, and which herbs put children to sleep, distinguishing which roots were poison and which were salve. I knew how to get the body up, McKinney declares in her interview. The Hamlet for Naylor then becomes a site of what Sean Crawley calls the a-institutional cramped spaces of Black study, in quote, that enable both Black ecological ethics and critiques of Black ecological propriety in modern day. In bringing Naylor's work to the discussion of Black ecologies, my hope is that Naylor's literary works and ecological research methods might help us to reckon with the matrix of neoliberal inclusion, ecological crisis, and empire. A matrix wherein individuals who adhere to the state-sanctioned environmental practices are rewarded with the opportunity to participate in the ongoing ecological crises that is U.S. empire, and further skew the life chances of Black people diasporically under the guise of Black excellence. Naylor's text and her research practices direct us to see the intracommunal ecological harm that desire for neoliberal inclusion produces. With this in mind, how might we explore ecological propriety further, indexing its manifestation across time in the Black diaspora and Black communities' contestation of it? Moreover, Naylor's work expands the growing tropes of Black ecologies discourse. What would it mean to think Winter's plot alongside Naylor's Hamlet? What alternative ways of being might emerge from thinking and reading them together? In so doing, perhaps we might get closer to what Toni K. Bombara describes as the real vocation of the briar patch, another trope of Black ecologies, that vocation being, quote, to build home base, sanctuaries where Black people can stand upright, exhale, and figure out what to do about the latest attack. Thank you.
Thank you. That was wonderful. Everybody was so great. Dr. Gill-Sadler made me think about a lot of things, but this neoliberal inclusion and this ecological propriety is very interesting. And it reminds me of Excel Carrera's sort of violence of relation and not seeking recourse from the state, but actually trying to overthrow the state. So thank you all for these wonderful, wonderful presentations. So if you're a panelist in today's event and would like to participate in Q&A, you can turn on your video now. And then we'll just accept questions via the chat. Remarks as well are also welcome. But I know there were a lot of things coming at us, so I'll give some folks a moment to ruminate and think about things.
My hair is smoking, y'all. Y'all did that. As a good, ooh, Randi, that last paper, man, that was, whew. Yes. I'm just voicing that out loud.
I would have to agree. That was great.
I have to say, Ebony, you know Courtney, and that is my heart. I don't know if you Jermaine and Aubrey, all of them we're all in the same family in the community. So yay, them.
Yeah, they're really awesome. Been working with them for a minute now.
Mm-hmm.
Any questions? Oh, okay.
Could I ask a question? Or Leah, you was about to say something. Go ahead.
No, you go ahead, JT.
I was just going to ask for the artists to talk about your processes.
So what's going on for me right now in terms of process? Actually, what's been going on, not just right now, is I'm a research-based maker. So it takes me a lot of time to go from what am I thinking about to seeing examples of what you saw today. I've been in a 2.5-year research process for one of the pieces I'm working on now, and a 4-year process for another piece that I'm working on now. So I work very slowly. I live and work in New York. And so there is a lot about building the right community around a piece, which for me is a combination of using traditional methods of finding creative partners to those who, think that it might be best to do auditioning. Methods that I'm used to are like, who's in your community who can do the work? So that's what I mean by traditional methods. And who can you sit down and talk to? What is a real connection? Because for the work that I'm making, it's not just about twirling around on stage or in public space. It really is about being a conduit of spirit. And that is a big part of my process as well, which is really centering what are the rituals and ceremonies necessary to tell the story that we've been asked to tell. And once knowing those rituals and ceremonies, it's the commitment to doing them. So for one of the pieces that I recently made, it required going through an embodied process of 100 prompts on joy. Right now, the ensemble that I'm working with is going through 100 prompts on freedom. And so that could be writing about freedom, that can be embodying through warm up, through choreographic exploration, freedom. I have these prompts that I've been using and shifting and remixing for a number of years. And it's a way to bring in a deep meditation into the process of getting centered and clear. In the tradition of Dr. Omi Oshun, Johnnie L. Jones, and in the tradition of Daniel Alexander Jones and Sharon Bridgeforth, Lori Carlos, and many other elders and older siblings of mine, the work is always theatrical ceremony and in the jazz and blues aesthetic. And so the work has to be doing something attuned in a certain way to get a certain response. And that's very important. That means we need time. And time is infinite, but not in New York City theater and performance art making. And so building that community is absolutely critical because you can get more bandwidth if you believe and honor and trust the people you're working with. But the research process, right? And JT, Dr. Rohn has been a part of this process for work that I'm making now, commissioned from Weeksville Heritage Center, Weeksville being one of the first free Black colonies pre-Civil War to be established in what is now Crown Heights, on the border of Crown Heights and Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn. And in that piece, the piece has been really has been allowed to breathe by some of the work that was referenced earlier, Dr. Rohn's research on the plot, which in thinking about Weeksville as a Black liberation colony, as a hush harbor, it was really rooted in a place that was the castaway land. It was the swamp land. It was the bad land. And in that space, Black liberation was able to and currently thrives. And so this idea of thinking about land and what lives and what grows and what is sustained by the land has really been definitely since last year, but since I've known about Weeksville and other locations like it, that kind of research comes in waves and ripples and eventually gets into body, sound, costume, and other things. And the last thing I'll say is the work that I'm making now, most of it is about, what is underfoot, what rivers, what land, what fire is underfoot, and really thinking about liberation as a collaboration with the environment. And so being outside and really listening to what is outside as we are building processionals in public space is critical and key.
Me as an artist, I actually just during COVID-19 got smacked. I'm 29. I want to say that because I think the age is important. And so in the middle of COVID-19, I got smacked with the isolation situation. And so I had a lot of moments to meditate on the inside, which brought me outside. And so a lot of my work now, actually for the last few years, have been about deconstructing self deeply to find other, which has now turned into a spiritual thing, of course, and has actually embraced process as both a way to go towards ritual and also collaboratively see in multiple ways or sense in multiple ways. And I work in collaboration. So I don't usually work by myself either. But for that project specifically, you just saw that was something that was extremely instinctual, definitely. COVID just hit then, and that was right before a lot of the riots started in New York City specifically that weekend, actually. And so my energy, usually as an artist, my energy pulls me places, and those places I'm realizing are spiritual instincts. So, and then over time, I'm learning, okay, I'm understanding what this is. I'm understanding what stuff is. Right now, though, in a practice, I'm definitely more of someone who I am site responsive. Very site responsive. I am outside. I am consistently meditating and then doing research on the spaces I'm in, and finding ways to embody. So I'm a deep embodier and a vessel in multiple ways. I do consider myself someone who takes on spirits, and that a shadow prince thing was specifically conjuring a lot of rebelliousness and rebellion, and rebellious spirit. I actually, one of the things and images I had in my head was the Red Horseman at some point, and the idea of civil war. Right now, I'm working a lot in Revolutionary War sites in New York City for multiple reasons, mainly to talk about revolution. But yeah, so my whole process as an artist is about embodiment through process, embodiment through ritual, and I take a collective of people through that.
Thank you both. We have a question from the audience, from George. George says, I was struck by how many people Johnnie and Ebony know collectively and saw in each other's work. The dances reminded me of the importance of recognizing interlocutors in intellectual and movement work. What does co-conspiratorship look like between the worlds of dance and scholarship? How have interlocutors supported you in doing the work? Is it always planned or serendipity or both? So curious to hear about your experiences with chance encounters and with other creators.
We'll figure out which one to answer first.
It's a small community. We both live in New York City. Even if, that's one thing. That's the community is small, even though we may not all know each other's names. And so it's important for me. Being rigorous is what this boils down to. Many of the dance luminaries that we, see on major stages in this city and others, they live down the street, like literally. And so to be working in a tradition that is Jawole Willa-Jozolar, that is Diane McIntyre, that is Alvin Ailey, means that you are in an embodied scholarly practice. That's what it is. It's scholarship in a form that moves through dancers' bodies and artists' bodies, but it is no less rigorous. And it's very important because from a dramaturgical perspective, if the person doesn't really know what they are talking about or what you are looking to build, and that if they see themselves as separate from the art making, then it's a disaster, to be quite honest with you. So I don't take chances with that. I'm very pointed. I study people. I read a lot. And so sometimes before I even ask a person if they would be a researcher or a scholar on a project, then it's because I've already read, I've already studied. My university affiliation is with the Hemispheric Institute for Performance and Politics at NYU. And so I also come from a performance training that is rooted in scholarship, to be quite honest, and theory. And so it doesn't feel separate for me as a practitioner because of the way I've matriculated through university and other training settings. But I understand why it could feel like, what, dance dramaturgy? Why would you need a researcher? Why would you need a scholar? But for me, I can't make any work without that deep component to it.
Yeah, and I agree with Ebony about the interconnections in the city. It's quite amazing, but we're all connected. And as far as scholarship for me, personally, I don't consider myself I've never actually considered myself someone who was a scholar necessarily, but I'm understanding. I do consider myself a philosopher or a thinker in a very deep way, and I deconstruct things in ways that I know are defiant. So because of that, I see philosophy bridging into scholarship. Of course, I just don't know the relationship of scholarship and philosophy truly. And because of that, then I usually kind of get a little, I brush against the word intellectual a lot, and I don't know what to do with it personally, usually. So the support, I'm just now getting back into that space of speaking back to the scholarship, going back into scholarship and understanding how I actually am scholarly, you know what I mean? I just felt there was a lot of moments of, to be honest, not feeling accepted in the space. In the scholarship-based space, partially because I was Black, but also partially because my medium is an embodiment space, and I don't know if people understand the archival and spiritual research that it takes to actually embody and understand in a deep way. So, and when as far as the serendipity or plan situation, I am a long-term planner, so everything that I'm doing right now is a part of a 6-year project. But I set it up and tier it structurally so that I can have serendipitous moments. So that I can have these moments where I could just completely let go and experience what it is, and then come back to the archive of it to dig and deconstruct myself, or deconstruct the process, or deconstruct whatever, or the group in general. So I have all with the company, we work that way. So we'll create something, and then we'll look at it just so it can happen, so we can allow ourselves to embody it and not a cleaned way, and then we look at it again and say, what is this? And we educate ourselves about where we were. So both, but as of right now, I'm definitely in a serendipity-based space because I have the structure for the next couple of years to allow myself to do that. It takes a while though, because I'm in the 3rd year of it, and originally it wasn't like that, but I've set myself up to have this space.
So we're basically out of time, but I did want to get one question into Dr. Gill-Sadler, because your work was so also very complex and so nuanced. I just wanted to invite you to say more about ecological propriety and neoliberal inclusion.
Thank you for the question. I'll try to be quick, not to impede on other people's time. But yeah, that term is really coming out of a lot of Gloria Naylor's own work, but also what I'm interested in the Black women's literary renaissance is that at this kind of exact moment that Black women writers are being heralded as the signs that the US has overcome this kind of history of Black women renaissance, as anti-Blackness, as they're winning awards, fellowships, and, you know, publishing best-selling books, that this is the moment that Black women writers are moving the setting of their novels, their poems, and their essays to the Caribbean, which is also a premier site of US imperialism in the 70s and 80s. So I think the issue of ecological propriety is an extension of the US imperial project at that time, which has a lot to do with how do you become a proper member of US imperialism. And I think that, and Leah, you're probably aware of this, that the US does have these standards for how Black people diasporically can participate, quote unquote, effectively in US imperialism. And that is through being a kind of willingly exploited worker and or this kind of contemporary overseer to oversee and police other Black people. And so as I tried to kind of highlight in the presentation briefly, Naylor is someone who considered her first 4 novels a quartet. So they were all part of the same world that she was building. She's very much interested in the kind of community and ecology of Black people, but also understanding that crises and ecological crises, and particularly the desire to be middle class, is a crisis for Black people at every juncture. And that is, you know, part of her novel. I mean, that's part of all her novels, but in Mama Day, she did extensive research in the Sea Islands in the 80s, at the moment where state developers are actually coming in to purchase land, doing massive land grabs. So she was there, as well as in, you know, Robinsonville, Mississippi, and that part of the Delta, which is now a lot of casinos are there. So there's a lot of exploitation going on in that way as well. So ecological propriety is just a way for me to really talk about a very pointed analysis of US imperialism, a very pointed analysis of what Tony K. Bombara calls the credential mania of the university, and the ways that Black people get caught up into that rat race and project. But also, I really want to be, in my own work, clear about, you know, Black women are doing work to highlight this, but these are not always the works that are readily canonized or taught. And so, yeah, I'll stop right there.
That was wonderful. Thank you for saying more. That was extremely helpful. I'll be citing you. But yeah, thank you all for coming to this session of Black Ecologies. We hope to see you at our next session with our keynote speaker, Ashante Reese, and just a round of applause for all of our presenters and organizers and everybody else. Thank you all for sticking around. I know it's been a long day. I know it's been a long pandemonium, Panasonic, but we're all here, and I'm glad to see you all. And I hope you have a wonderful evening.